Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webinar, Knowledge Management, Enterprise Service Management, and the Customer Journey. Welcome to another in the HDI webinar series, HDI, Smarter Service, Better Business. Today's webinar is sponsored by TopDesk. You can connect with HDI on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on our community site, HDI Connect. And subscribe to our HDI podcast called Spockcast on iTunes or SoundCloud. I'm Roy Atkinson, Senior Writer Analyst for HDI, and we have just a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. If you are experiencing any technical problems, refresh your browser. It works wonders, believe me. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the webcast, and they'll be answered during the Q&A session toward the end of our webcast. You can download the slides from today's presentation by opening the Attachments tab on your BrightTalk screen. Be sure to check out the links that you'll find there as well. Remember that today's webinar will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live webcast, and you'll receive an email reminder that it's available. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. I mentioned that I'm Roy Atkinson from HDI, and with me today is Hannah Price, the service management expert for TopDesk, specializing in knowledge management and agile coaching. On these topics, Hannah is also a public speaker aiming to inspire better ways of working across the people and companies she meets. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi, nice to be here, Roy.
All right, so let's dive right in here. The graphs that you'll see here during my portion of the presentation, and Hannah and I will be discussing some of them, are from HDI research recently conducted, and must have functions for successful report. So successful support, sorry. The HDI State of Technology and Operations report from 2019, just recently released, shows the functions that you folks out there in the wide world consider to be the most essential. And you'll notice that incident management is number 1. Knowledge management is closely behind it at number 2. So you've told us that knowledge management is extremely important. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today and why it feeds into things like enterprise service management and how important it is to have. And you'll see a lot of discussion around that. So knowledge management is the number 2 function that you've told us you think is important to provide successful support. And of course, support in today's service desk goes way beyond just break fix. It goes into helping define services and manage the services throughout the organization. So knowledge management is an integral part of that. And here's an illustration of that. What we do is we ask, has the overall ticket volume, and that includes incidents, of course, and service requests, has it gone up or down this year? And an amazingly large proportion of organizations every year report that they've had a volume increase. This is one of the ways we know that the service desk isn't going out of business anytime soon. And this year, 68% of organizations told us that they've had an overall volume increase on incidents and service requests. That is a large proportion. It is it ties for the highest proportion of organizations that have had an increase in the last 10 years. It is substantially higher than it was last year, but this goes up and down. It's not a steady sample, so it's going to go up and down a little bit, but over 2/3 of organizations have had an increase in volume. And there are lots of reasons for that. You can see what some of those are. The factors that they have identified for their organizations, an increase in the number of applications, supporting the equipment that's in the organization, etc. So you can read down through those, and I strongly suggest that you do download the presentation so you get a good look at some of these graphs, charts, and explanations. On the other side of the coin, what proportion of organizations have seen a decrease in volume? And this is of concern simply because we want to know how organizations are doing. Are they able to handle the volume that they have? Are they not able to handle it? As we all know, the budgets for support and service support are not skyrocketing. They're generally pretty flat. And so how do you handle these increases and maintain a flat budget? It's not the easiest thing to do. So some organizations have figured out the combination of having a decrease in overall volume for incidents and service requests, and it's only 10% of organizations. But as you can see, the top factors in those decreases they identified as self-help and knowledge base. And this is one of the reasons that we're really concentrating on knowledge management these days. It really is a key to decreasing the ever-increasing volume, because we're supporting more systems, we're supporting more applications, we're supporting more customers, more end users. All of that goes up every year, right? So how do we maintain our sanity and our ability to get the work done among all those increases? And one of the ways is to have successful self-help, and that successful is really important, and to have a good knowledge base. It makes efficiencies happen. For example, one of the examples that we use at HDI is time to proficiency. You bring somebody new into the organization, into the support organization, set them at the service desk. How long does it take them to be proficient on their own? One of the best ways to support that time to proficiency and decrease the time it takes somebody to ramp up is to provide them with a good knowledge base to work from, to learn about the organization, to learn about the various components of the technologies that are being supported. So those are the number 1 and 2 factors in getting a decrease in the volume to the service desk is self-help and a knowledge base. Make sense? I'm sure that you're behind that 100%, Hannah.
Yes, I certainly am. It's a trend we see a lot here in the UK, that you're so expected to do more with less, and I think those stats really reflect that across all the countries, and that's why knowledge management is just absolutely crucial, because it's the only way that you're going to be able to realise that, and it's about working smarter, not just working harder.
And that's a phrase that we hear a lot, right? Work smarter, not harder. Now we'll go on to the second part of the title of today's webinar, and we'll talk about enterprise service management a little bit. Service management has been around for a long time. Of course, ITIL has been around since the 80s, and we're now into ITIL 4. But organizations have learned over time what works. They've adopted and adapted the processes and practices laid out in frameworks like ITIL, and there are others as well, of course, to make the work happen and get it done the right way, to provide what the organization needs to do business and to reach its goals while providing good services, how to define those services, how to strategize about those services, etc. So, and now, over the last few years, we've seen a trend where other business units within the enterprise, within the organization, are adopting those service management processes and practices, the principles of IT service management, being adapted to other lines of business. And right now, as you can see from this graph, quite a few are doing it already, over a quarter, and another large chunk, about a third, are planning right now to do it and are in the process of doing it. Another 40-odd% say they're not going to do it, but I suspect that's going to change. And the reason for that is just, well, we'll talk a little bit more about what some of the advantages are of doing this, but there are some things that you really need to do ahead of time, and one of them is to make sure that your service management world is in order, that you're doing things well, then you can demonstrate to the rest of the organization that there are advantages of using these approaches to service management. And service management did not originate in IT. it originated elsewhere. It originated in places like manufacturing. But IT really took the ball forward a long way. But now the other business units are beginning to see the advantages of it and adopting it. So that is an ongoing trend, I'm sure, in the UK as well. So another thing that we need to bear in mind on knowledge management is that the support organization and IT in general is not the only place in the organization that knowledge is being created and consumed. From our perspective, we see a lot more of it in terms of the service desk providing knowledge for end users so that they can use their technology. But other lines of business that are also participating in enterprise service management, like human resources, which has become a really strong partner in enterprise service management, I might add, and some of our other research, we turn up that HR is like the #1 partner. But facilities and customer service and sales and marketing, all of these different parts of the organization are both consuming knowledge, as we would expect, but also creating it. And the dark blue bars with the creation part of it, those are going to get longer over the next few years as more lines of business participate in the creation of knowledge and a shared knowledge basis. And this is really important to get. One of the reasons for this, which we could go into at great length, but we won't have time today to do it, is simply because knowledge contributes so much toward the ability to automate, the ability to bring in advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, bots, all of that depend very heavily on having structured knowledge and being able to tap that knowledge and direct it to the right places within the organization. So we have to stop thinking about knowledge management just from the perspective of IT and just from the perspective of support. It goes throughout the organization. And Hannah, are you seeing trends like this happening in your part of the world?
Oh, absolutely. It used to be the case years ago even that IT, as you say, were the early adopters. In this case, they were the ones managing the knowledge, creating it, maintaining it, and it's just not the case anymore. We sometimes see that other departments within an organization, they will be the first movers, and they will really have fantastic knowledge management processes in place that sometimes IT can learn from as well. So it really is taking off at an enterprise level.
And I can tell you from personal experience, I used to work in an organization that was extremely dependent on knowledge throughout the organization, a scientific research organization. And the creation of knowledge was a big component of every single department in that organization. And the management of that knowledge was centrally located, and it was not in IT. So this is a continuing trend. It's a growing trend. And it has an awful lot to do with moving forward in providing business goals and good outcomes to every aspect of the organization. As you know, we live in an extraordinarily competitive time. And so we asked in our research, we said, what are the business drivers influencing the expansion of service management? Why would you do this outside of IT? And the #1 response is to improve the customer experience. Let's think about that, all right? And the customer in this case, some organizations, as you know, define the customer as our colleagues. They are our customers. They come to us for services. And then you have to think about the end customer of the business, too, the external customer, the person who's buying the products and services of the enterprise. It improves their experience as well. Why is this? And this bears some discussion. First of all, you have to think about the fact that if you're buying into a common set of practices and processes, no matter where you are in that organization, you have a good understanding of how it's supposed to work. You're going to be working in a common way and probably on a common set of tools, which of course is the other component of the enterprise knowledge management, and I know we'll hear more about that from you, Hannah. But working on a common set of tools in a common way is really important. My experience as an employee of the organization, for example. If I know how to do things to work with IT, I also know how to do things to work with facilities, to work with HR, to make a request, to get a service started, to tell them I need something from them, or I need a particular product from them. How you provide an office, a desk, a computer is done in a common way. So it doesn't surprise me at all that we turned up this bit of information that improving the customer experience is the number one reason that organizations are in fact adopting enterprise service management. It just makes good sense. So why would this happen? How is it that enterprise service management contributes to customer experience? And as I mentioned, the consistency of processes across the organization is a really big factor. If you know how to do something for facilities, you know how to do it with IT, you know how to do it with HR, you know how to do it with training, marketing, whatever. There's a common way to request things. The interface through which you do that might be very similar. You might be in a common portal that allows you access to different parts of the organization. And so it's not just getting a computer or getting your computer fixed. It's your squeaky office chair, or your group is hiring a new colleague and bringing them in, and you need more office space and more furniture and more phone lines, whatever it happens to be. You can do that in the same way. It's not the same thing, but it's done in the same way, and that's important. If every time you went back to Amazon to buy something, you had to do it differently, you might think about whether or not you'd go to Amazon. But as you know, when you go to Amazon, the way that you buy a book and the way that you buy a garage is pretty much the same thing, right? It works the same way, and that's really important. Consistency of tools, as I mentioned, it might be in the same portal. You're going to get the same types of notifications. You have the ability to manage your relationship with that particular aspect of the organization in similar ways. Your approvals are going to be done the same way. And so it just makes perfect sense to do this in similar ways and to pick up on the culture of the organization and to be able to adapt to it. But here's the big win from my perspective, and Hannah, you'll probably want to chime on this as well. Common data. So if HR has its own database and they work only from that, and IT has its database and it works only from the ITSM tool and only based on people who are in Active Directory and have contact with the service desk, etc. And facilities has its own, and everybody has their own databases, which is the way it has happened in a lot of organizations. Everything is siloed, and nobody has a view of what's going on in the rest of the organization. If there's a common data pool, now this doesn't mean that everybody has access to everything. Obviously, if HR is in there, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be confidential. But you have access management to those aspects of the data set so that the right people get the right information. But the nice part of it is that the data is common. So I have one identity in the organization, and how that identity presents itself to different parts of the organization is done through the management of the common data. Therefore, the organization, including HR and facilities and training and all of those different components, has more of a 360-degree view of me as an employee. The same is true of customers. Excuse me, if sales brings a customer in and it goes into a common data pool, everybody who deals with that data, to marketing, to manage the information that goes out to that customer, everything is aimed at a common knowledge of that customer and how they act and how frequently they buy and how to contact them, et cetera, et cetera. So that I think is the most important element of this. Hannah, do you have thoughts on that subject?
Yes, I completely agree, actually. And what I like about it is how the focus on customer experience like this really ties it all together when you think about, okay, so we can give consistency of process, consistency of tools, common data, provide this amazing customer experience, and that rubs off then in the case of employees to provide an amazing employee experience. And research, I think, shows that if you've got engaged employees that are really benefiting from this amazing customer experience, they're more productive at work, they're more engaged at work, and the business sees a lot of benefit in the long run as well. So I think that's a lot of the reason why we're seeing customer experience at the forefront of ESM, because businesses can see the value that they can get out of delivering this.
And just as a bit of a side note, but certainly relevant here, a couple of years ago, we do annual research on just about every aspect of the service desk and the support organization and service management. And one of the things that we include in that research is how are you doing on customer satisfaction? And organizations tell us what what the averages are for their customer satisfaction. And it's usually in the high 80s or close to 90% customer satisfaction. And we also do some research on employee satisfaction. And I thought, well, there's a lot of talk. It's often stipulated, or it's often mentioned when people talk about customer service that if you give your employees a good experience, they're going to give your customers a good experience. So I said, well, let's analyze that. Let's look at the data. Let's do a cross comparison between organizations that have high customer satisfaction and organizations that have high employee satisfaction. And let's see if there really is a relationship between those two things. And it turns out that there is. In fact, organizations that have highly satisfied employees have about a 5% higher customer satisfaction. And in an industry where the customer satisfaction tends not to vary very much, 5% is a huge difference. So it's proven. Okay, employee satisfaction and customer satisfaction go hand in hand. So the better experience your internal employees have, the better experience your external customers are going to have. And I don't know if you have any data around that or if you've seen it, but it's often talked about, as I said, in the industry, Hannah, and we've proved it.
Yes, we have a little phrase actually that we use here at Top Desk called happy employees are contagious. Because whether you mean it or not, you can't help rubbing off on your customers. If you're really happy and engaged at work, the customers feel it and you don't even have to try. It's just a natural result. So yeah, I can fully get behind those statistics there.
Yeah, and I see it, I travel a lot for work, and I see it in hotels where if I walk into a hotel and there's somebody vacuuming in the hallway and they step aside, make eye contact with me and smile and greet me, I suspect that I'm going to have a very pleasant stay at that hotel. Whereas if they are quiet and keep their head down and don't interact with me, generally speaking, it's okay, but it's not a really good experience. So, it really does make perfect sense, and you'll run into it every day. If you start watching for it, you'll see that employee effect. And the same is true in a large enterprise that's doing information technology. And Hannah, I think you have some really good information for us coming up, so I'm going to hand it over to you.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Well, hi everyone, as Roy has already said, my name is Hannah and I work for Top Desk as a service management consultant. I have the privilege of working very closely with organizations and helping making things like enterprise service management a reality. My expertise and my real passion within enterprise service management has always been knowledge management. I'd like to talk to you a bit about that today as well. It's really inspiring and exciting to hear those statistics that you've just mentioned, Roy, especially the one about, I think it's almost 2/3 of organizations already adopting or at least planning to adopt enterprise service management. And we spoke a little bit before about how in the past it used to be IT that would always be the first ones driving adoption, being the early starters to push for enterprise service management. But nowadays, it's not always the case. You see other departments like HR, like facilities, also saying, hey, come on, we actually need this in our business. It's going to bring us so much value. I'm actually working with a university at the moment who made this push for enterprise service management, and it actually came from their student services department, so not any of kind of like the big three, IT, facilities, HR, that we usually see. So it's really interesting to see how it's being taken up now. And it kind of got us to thinking, actually, like, what are the reasons for this? Why is this push happening more than before? And I think you really hit the nail on the head there, Roy, when you started talking about it being down to the customer experience. Customer experience is absolutely everything. And the main interface that our customers do experience on a day-to-day basis, sometimes even an hourly basis, is Google. So it's no wonder that they have these very high expectations of the services that we provide as well. There's actually a name for this. It's called the Google effect. And what it means is that because internet access is like a given now, it's almost considered a bit of a human right, a bit like clean water or electricity. Because this easy access of information is so important and coming from one central point, we've actually developed this tendency to forget a lot of information that we receive on a day-to-day. It's sometimes called digital amnesia. We're so used to fast centralized data that we don't need to remember so much information. And from a service management perspective, what we see our customers expecting is that same level of service. They expect easy access. They expect really, really quick results in a few clicks. And crucially, they don't expect to think about who they should contact or where they should go to find an answer to a question or to request something. They're really looking for that centralized Google, if you like. There's not a Google for if you want to do your grocery shopping and a Google if you want to book your holiday. It's all in one place. But of course, trying to achieve Google-like levels of service management can seem pretty daunting, pretty impossible at first. So what I'd like to share with you next is something at Topless that we call the ESM growth model.
Hannah, are you there?
Oh,
I think we might.
hi Roy, sorry about that. Must have cut out there. So on the screen there in front of you, you'll see the Enterprise Service Management Growth Model. This is a model that we designed at Topdesk to help it not feel like there was a big mountain that you have to climb and turn around and suddenly have to achieve Enterprise Service Management tomorrow. Instead, we've broken it down into a few easier to deal with steps, because what we found is with organizations, dealing with changes are much more easily done if they're implemented one step at a time. People become used to new situations if the changes are gradual and not implemented with a big bang when it comes to enterprise growth. It also means that it gives us the time to implement proper coaching and training of the people involved to make sure that it's rolled out as a success. So to explain this model a little bit further, on the screen here you'll see a graph. We've got quality on the left-hand side. This is the soft side, if you like. It represents how the customer experiences quality of service. And we're not just thinking about quality of service in an isolated department, but it's more of service as a whole that they can experience from your organization. So for example, they may have one department that gives them an amazing experience, but another department might be very different. And because that customer then experiences a lack of the Google effect across all departments, the quality could be lower. So it's a very holistic approach to quality on that side of the axis. And then along the bottom, we've got the savings as well. So we're looking at the straightforward cost saving and benefits that you can expect. So when an organization is starting on their enterprise service management pathway, they always start in the same place, and that's with nothing shared to start with. It's a starting point for everybody. Each department uses their own tools, their own assets, their own technology and processes to support their customers. And at that point, it means that the departments don't actively share in the quality or savings that they could make. Now, the next natural step that we recommend is to start sharing a tool. It's the first steps towards collaboration between departments working in the same tool and technology that help support each other. It's also something that's changed at Topdesk when we get to this phase 2, because recently, when we started to implement Topdesk at organizations, it used to be we'd start with IT. And that would be a very common way to set up Topdesk. But now what we're seeing is that implementations of Topdesk are typically enterprise or shared services right from the start. So IT, facilities, and HR will all be involved in the setup of the system, because people are ready now to start embarking on step 2 and starting sharing that tool. The next logical step is sharing a service desk. Now, this can be as simple as a shared portal, a digital front end that you can give to your customers and to your employees, or it can sometimes also mean a physical shared service desk as well. So some organizations actually move the service desks of their different departments into the same place, or even merge them into one centralized shared service desk as well, which can be really nice for the end user experience. And finally, that gold standard, the shared process. We really do believe that the future lies in sharing processes, which is that last and final phase in the growth model. And the advantages to this final step really are huge. If you look at a process that we can all relate to, for example, say the new starter process or the onboarding process, it's a process by its nature that involves so many different teams and so many different departments. Imagine how much cleaner and how much more efficient it could be if that process was shared. If those departments worked together, if there was no breakdown in communication and transparency between departments, it could be amazing for the end user to have that sort of experience. So those are the sort of gold standards that we think, okay, we can't achieve these tomorrow, but step by step, any organization can achieve enterprise service management. But what I'm really interested to hear from our listeners is actually, where do you guys see yourself in this model? So I'd like to hand you back over to Roy actually to see if we can get some data from the audience on this specific question.
Okay, and this is going to be pretty easy. If you go to the Vote tab on your BrightTalk screen, don't respond with a question, but go to the Vote tab, and we're going to launch a poll here. And I'm going to start the voting, and you should see that on your Vote tab now. Where do you see yourself in the model that Hannah just spoke about? Are you at the nothing shared level, the shared tools, shared service desk, or shared processes? Where are you in that stair step? And I know that some organizations don't necessarily do this in this order. Some start with a shared service desk, which might be a little scary since we don't have the common tools yet, right? So do you see people going in that direction, Hannah?
We do sometimes. Sometimes we'll visit an organization, and you're right, the shared service desk is already in place, which is totally fine. This isn't the one-size-fits-all. But then, of course, introducing a shared toolset does make the automation a lot easier, and the communication between them can be simplified once the technology is there to support it.
Right, and again, sharing that common data set, which is, from
Exactly.
my perspective anyway, certainly a really good thing. Okay, I've stopped the voting. We'll just give it a second to tabulate here. And so, wow, 42% say they're at the nothing shared level. So you're living in silos every day. Shared tools, 21%. Shared service desk, 17%. And shared processes, 17%. So nothing shared is where the biggest chunk of the audience is at, Hannah. What do you think about that?
That's interesting. I'm not too surprised in a way. Very, very common is to find that step 1 and step 2 is the most commonly seen by organizations, but it is really nice to see that already 17% of organizations listening here at least are already sharing processes. I think that's really fantastic. Even if you might have started off that right at the top of the scale, and then maybe a tool set gets introduced later on, I think it's really, really promising. Certainly for the clients and customers that I work with, it's a similar spread. Phases 1 and 2 seem to be certainly the most popular to start off with. And this, for me, is where knowledge management kind of ties back into it. Because if you're in those early phases, phase 1, phase 2, for example, One of the primary reasons why it might be hard to advance to next level or to see where your next steps are come down to knowledge management and having a knowledge sharing environment. And I found this really nice quote actually from McKinsey, and it finds that CEOs say that there are two key symptoms of people working in silos. One is inadequate information or inadequate knowledge sharing, and the second is insufficient accountability or coordination. And those are the kind of two main things that can really be a barrier to achieving enterprise service management. And I find that interesting because those knowledge gaps or that lack of information can be something that blocks what can be a really amazing step in terms of improvements of quality and improvements in savings that you could make. So a question that we get asked a lot by organisations who are on their ESM journey is, well, what do you recommend? What should we do? What is a good way for us to share knowledge? And usually we will always recommend a best practice that I'm sure you're very familiar with as well, Roy, which is KCS. Perhaps if you haven't heard of KCS before, it stands for Knowledge Centered Services. It was created by the Service Innovation Consortium as a best practice, and we use this a lot when rolling out enterprise service management organizations because it really brings so many benefits. I'm a massive fan of KCS. I would love to talk all day on this webinar about KCS, but I think we'll be here all evening if we do that, so I will try and resist. But what I would like to draw your attention to, if I can briefly, is the 4 principles of KCS, and you can see them there on the slide. 2 of them in particular are absolutely crucial for enterprise service management, and they are the principle of creating value and the principle of trust. So maybe a little bit more about just those 2. Creating value, this principle is all about working strategically. If we can teach people that by sharing knowledge, so not keeping knowledge to yourself, but actually making it available collectively, it's not just going to make lives better for you, but it'll actually collectively improve your ability to execute tasks, to eliminate the need for doing boring, repetitive incidents, and that when you share knowledge, it's not just you that benefits, but all of the colleagues and teams that you interact with across those borders of silos and departments. And when you really show that value, they can see the reality of that, and it makes enterprise service management an easier step to make because people are on board straight away. They can see, hey, there's a greater good in this. It's about, as we said before, working smarter so that we don't have to work harder. And the second one that really resonates, sorry, Roy.
Finish that thought, and just at the end of it, I have something to add about KCS and some recent research that we've done.
Sure. Well, I was just going to briefly mention about trust. It's in the middle of the principles for a reason, because trust is so powerful. It's a prerequisite for engaged and inspired knowledge work, and if departments want to work together in a kind of true knowledge sharing and ESM environment, then trust, it has to be a given. It has to be there so that when people do have trust, we can see that they do better work and they do more of it as well, whereas if it's absent, it can be quite a source of dysfunction between teams that, again, can get in the way of that enterprise service management.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of my favorite business books, by the way, is The Speed of Trust by Mr. Covey. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. KCS is an extraordinary methodology. It is the most widely used specific knowledge management methodology, by the way. But in some recent research, we looked at how satisfied organizations are with their knowledge management program as it is. And those who are using the KCS methodology are far more satisfied than those who are not using a specific methodology or just using what came built into their service management tool or something like that. 47% of the respondents that said that they are satisfied with their current knowledge management program are KCS folks, and that's 20 points higher than the next highest. So KCS is absolutely a very, very useful tool. It requires commitment and time and training and effort, but it really shows the organization's commitment to knowledge management and builds a very strong knowledge management base.
Yes, I completely agree with that, which is why those statistics are really, really nice to hear. It was actually KCS that kind of inspired me to kind of go down the route of specializing within knowledge management, because it's so rare that you see kind of one best practice that can have so many far-reaching benefits. It sounds really cheesy, but it's almost everyone from the CEO of a company right through to the end user using your product can get affected by the benefits of KCS. So I'd say if this is something our listeners are interested in, do look up KCS and the Service Innovation Consortium if you can do, because there's some amazing resources on there. Okay, so what I'd like to speak about a little bit next is what you mentioned towards the end of your statistics, Roy, about customer experience, because it really is the driving force behind the ESM initiative, and as a result, it has to be at the heart of everything we do. If we're embarking on an ESM journey, it's got to come back to the customer experience at the end of it, eventually leading to the engaged employee and the business benefits that we spoke about as well. I like having this almost as the secret ingredient or the fallback, because if you're ever at a crossroads when you're looking at enterprise service management and you don't know where to go, is it path A, is it path B, what decision should we make, then customer experience can always be that decision maker for you. It can always be that thing that you have in your back pocket that can help you make really good decisions. But what we often get asked is, okay, that sounds great, but how can you actually know what your customer is actually experiencing? And when on an ESM transformation, I usually recommend a particular tool to organizations, because it's really straightforward, really easy to use, and it gives amazing insights onto customer experiences and what your customer is actually going through. You may have heard of it before. It's called a customer journey map. A definition of a customer journey map is very straightforward. It's a visual representation of the emotions that your customer experiences during each interaction or between interactions. Sounds pretty straightforward. I've also created a visual image of what this could look like on this slide here. So what you can see is a basic representation of a customer journey map. Just to give a little bit of insight on how this works, on the left-hand side of the screen we have what's called an axis for your Emoti score. Now this is the emotion or the positivity or negativity that a customer feels, positive being at the top and negative at the bottom. And at the bottom of this diagram you have a timeline. Now depending on what service your customer journey map is for, your timeline will look slightly different. So for this example on the screen here, we've done a timeline for the purchase of a new equipment that then breaks down and needs to be fixed. So you'll see at the very top we've got that timeline broken down into steps from purchase to breakdown to call for help, all the way through to resolution at the end. And at each step in that timeline you're defining exactly what emotion is going through that customer at that point, and we've used some fun emojis there to bring a visual representation to that as well. Now you can only get that kind of data by actually talking to your customers, actually interviewing them and finding out what they go through and the journey that they take for a particular service. And what it might reveal to you is things that you've never realized were happening. I've always done this with organizations and had at least one, sometimes many more things come up, which has surprised everybody in the room to know something that they didn't know about a service they provide. In one particular example, someone was actually reduced to tears because of the revelation and the insights that they got from it. So it can be quite an eye-opening experience to do an exercise like this. An example of this is it will bring to light things such as long waiting times. Now, waiting times sometimes can be a little bit invisible to us as service departments, but to the customer they can cause a huge deal of distress and uncertainty. We sometimes call these periods the great unknown, because the customer hasn't really got a clue what's going on, and it can cause customer journey scores to decline quite dramatically. And if you're able to do customer journey mapping on a process between shared departments, say for example onboarding or a new starter, you can get a customer journey map that looks a little bit like this. Now this slide shows a full customer journey map, which is intentionally quite small, so you don't necessarily have to know or look what all the detail is. It's here to show the richness of information that you can gather on a process where multiple departments are involved, which is of course crucial to enterprise service management. And on that model that we saw earlier, if you're looking through the steps, if you're someone in the poll earlier and you're in stage 1 or stage 2 and you're trying to boost into those later stages and really looking at sharing service desks and processes with your other teams and departments, using a customer journey map like this can be really, really useful. Because if you're looking at this page now without even reading any words on the screen, I can instantly see where my low moments are. I can instantly see key moments where if on the journey I focus there, the customer experience is just going to rocket up. I can see where I could make efficiency improvements. I could see where I might need to communicate better with departments. It really brings all these things to the forefront. And I like to think of it as the difference between making a change and kind of hoping for the best, hoping it does improve customer experience, and then making a change when you are confident that you will dramatically improve the customer experience. It's really about focusing those improvements.
And customer
So
feedback along the way plays an extremely important part in this too, right, Hannah? Gathering that feedback not only when you start, but also as you work through, you change a process, how do the customers respond to that? Getting that consistent feedback is really important.
Absolutely. I think sometimes people with feedback can sometimes worry that they have to ask a lot of questions, but if you mentioned you're asking those small questions as you go along, as you change things, it only takes seconds to get that feedback from a customer, and it can give really good insights as to whether you're moving in the right direction or not. Okay, just to wrap up briefly, because I mentioned a few different things in those slides, hopefully this can now bring it all together for us. And what we've learnt at Topdesk with helping organisations on their journey to ESM is that it's not an overnight switch. It's a journey that you take step by step. And if you've got your departments and your teams as your partners by your side on this journey, you will progress through the steps. And of course, utilise knowledge sharing best practices with the people at the heart of this, so that if you go further, you're really working in an enterprise service management environment, but a true knowledge sharing environment as well. And whilst you're doing this, if you can also understand exactly what your customer is going through, using tools such as the customer journey map to understand customer experience, you will know that every step that you do make is going in the right direction and will have the highest chance of success. So that's it from me. I'll hand it over to you, Roy. Do you have any thoughts on this as well?
I not only have thoughts, I have some questions from our audience. So
Wonderful.
Why don't we go and answer some of those questions for them? And let's go down that road. So Q&A time here. First question. How long does it typically take to achieve enterprise service management?
That is a very good question. I hope the listeners here won't be too disappointed if I cannot give an exact number of days, months or years. It's a question that we always get asked at the start of a journey to enterprise service management, and it depends hugely on what you want to achieve. There is no point, we believe at least at Topdesk, going ahead with enterprise service management if you don't know where it wants to take you. So we start every journey with defining, okay, what would make this a success for us? What are the factors? What are the goals that we want to reach? Maybe it's something as simple as a completely seamless new starter process, or maybe it's complete transparency between departments. And once you've isolated those kind of key success factors, you can work backwards and figure out a timeline from there. It typically isn't something that does take days, weeks. You're talking more months and sometimes even years as well to really kind of get that cultural change in. Is that something that you would agree with as well, Roy?
I would, and I would also suggest that folks need to focus on enterprise service management, in fact, service management of any kind, as not as a project with a completion point, but as something that happens continually throughout the organization. So You're not going to achieve nirvana at some point here. There's constant work required, and this is a cyclical process where it builds on itself. But to get enterprise service management in process, one step at a time, I think the process that Hannah talked about, the different steps, are good ones, and we see that organizations are really making progress, getting partner lines of business like HR, like facilities on board and moving ahead. So yeah, great. Here's a question. I love this one, and Hannah, you'll want to address this, and then I will add to it. Does KCS work with ITIL?
Again, another very good question there. I'm not surprised to hear this question. Sometimes people think that you can have one and not the other, but it's not the case at all. I actually find that KCS and ITIL can work very complementarily together. For example, when we are building in knowledge management processes in line with KCS, we directly plug these into the ITIL function. So for example, we'll build knowledge into the incident management process. We'll build knowledge into the request management process. For me personally, I have no reason why they can't work well together, and the majority of implementations of KCS do have ITIL within them as well. But I know you know a lot on this subject as well, Roy, if I'm not mistaken.
In fact, I do. You can go to Axelos, A-X-E-L-O-S. That's the organization that owns ITIL. You can go to their website at axelos.com, and you can just put KCS in the search. And what you will find is a paper that HDI and Axelos did together, and of which I'm one of the co-authors. And it's called Synergies Between ITIL and KCS. And if you want to understand more about how they work together, you can look at that. And I would strongly suggest that you do. And it tells you quite a bit about KCS and a little bit about ITIL and how they can work very nicely together. So the answer to your question is absolutely yes, they can work together. All right. More questions. How do organizations that do not have shared tools get along the road to ESM? So if you take that step out, they don't have a shared tool, what can they do, Hannah?
Well, firstly, no need to worry. If you don't have a shared tool or there's no plan to get a shared tool, does not mean that you can't realize a huge improvements in the quality and the cost savings as well. What we usually encourage organizations in that situation is just to leverage the tool set that they already have. In a lot of these cases, although technology is, of course, really important in supporting things like ESM and KCS, it is not the be-all and end-all. There are so many other important factors such as the people, the process, and the coaching to make sure that all those things come into place. So if you are working towards working more closely with other departments and you're working in your separate tools, a nice place to start is to kind of sit down with the application managers of those tools and at least see if there's any quick wins that you can have in terms of automation between the two or passing information between the two, so that, okay, you don't use the same tool set, but still we can communicate and collaborate together a little bit easier than we did before.
And I think that kind of feeds into another question that's here. Can customer journey mapping be automated in any way?
That's a very interesting question, and it's actually not one that I've heard directly like that before. Typically, customer journey mapping does involve some sort of direct communication with the customer in form of interviews. So typically, to start a customer journey map, we'll interview X number of people on a certain service. I suppose actually what an interesting idea might be is, could you even automate from the start of that and get those questions on service out in an automated way and gather that data? And if there's an algorithm sitting behind that, possibly even it could map those scores out for you. So I would say, yeah, that's definitely possible.
Yeah, and there's ways to creatively do that, even if you don't have any, too much advanced technology. You can look at things like, if you have a knowledge base, how many customers are going there, how often are they searching, how many articles did they hit in each search. that tells you how effective your knowledge base is, and it tells you that their experience is not good. If they're hitting on a bunch of articles every time that they search, they're poking around for the answer that they're looking for and not finding it, especially if that search in your knowledge base winds up ending in a call to the service desk because they didn't find anything they were looking for. So information like that can help you build your customer journey map. You just have to know where to look for it. And one of the first things to do, from my perspective anyway, is to identify the touch points that you have with your customers. Try to get as many of them as you can. Think through the entire journey that your customer takes. When they come on board, they come to you as a brand new employee, as you mentioned, onboarding, right? All the steps that go on in onboarding. What is their experience like, and how can you identify the different points that you need to think about when they're making that journey, and then sit down and work with them to make sure that you've got it right and get feedback on each one of those points, and you start to map it. And then here's another question. Where can we learn more about KCS? Well, there's a number of places that you can go. As Hannah mentioned, you can go to the Consortium for Service Innovation. If you just do a search on that place that Hannah mentioned a couple of times, Google, starts with a G, ends with Google, you can click on the KCS link that you will find, and it will talk a lot about KCS and information that you can download directly from the consortium. Once you start to get serious, you might want to take some education, and that you can get from HDI, as well as some others, but I will say HDI offers KCS Foundation and KCS Principles, a more advanced course for the folks who are going to be running a KCS program. So absolutely ask us more about KCS. Did you want to add to that, Hannah, at all, or is that?
No, I'd second exactly what you said there. The resources on the consortium website are so good. They really do practice what they preach because they have made their own knowledge available freely as well, which is great. The only thing that I would add is you can also add to your search Top Desk and knowledge management. We've got a few webinars and best practice advice up there as well, and blog posts. So if you do get a chance to look through those, they can be a good read too.
Great. Here's a good one. Can you give some examples of how data points are measured in the customer journey mapping process? So how do you score them, basically? And the answer to that is, in my experience, pretty much any way you define. So you could make it really simple, as Hannah shared that simple customer journey map. You could say, were they unsatisfied? Were they sort of satisfied? Were they angry? At that particular touch point, that touch point identification is extremely important, as I mentioned before. And then you can set the measures on those pretty much any way you want, as long as it's consistent, and as long as you try to do that as much across the organization as possible, so that you're looking at the same type of information. What is the response? Are they angry? Are they happy? Are they sad? And maybe on a scale of whatever you determine, 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 0 to 10, whatever, however you want to scale it. Do you run across organizations that have a specific type of measurement there, Hannah?
No, it does vary a lot as well. It can be a numerical scale, as you've already said. Something that we often use if we're trying to find a way that works for a particular organization to find that scale is we recommend to look up a diagram called Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions. Now, forgive me because I'm probably pronouncing Plutchik's wrong, but if you Google it, you'll find that there's a really nice diagram there that shows the range of emotions that a person can go through, and it's nice because it gives an extra flavor to mapping out what those data points are, so you don't just necessarily have kind of happy, medium and kind of sad as your data points. You can actually have a lot more kind of a rich information in there, like, or maybe they're actually a little bit bored, or maybe they are completely apathetic, or maybe they are feeling quite stressed. it makes you really get into the shoes of the customer in a way that when you're targeting that point later, when you're making improvements off the back of the customer journey map, you know you're targeting for that particular emotion, or that person was feeling bored, or that person was feeling unsure. It really kind of makes your improvements focus to bring the best possible customer experience.
Great. Well, thank you, Hannah, very much for being with us today, and thank you to TopDesk, our sponsor for today's webinar. Please rate the webinar before you depart. It really helps us improve our program. And just some disclaimers here. Our next webinar will be on January 21st, 2020. It's going to be hard to get used to saying that, but it's coming right up. And we hope that 2019 has been a very successful year for your organization. This webcast is copyright 2019 by Informa Tech. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by HDI, which is solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of HDI, thanks for your time and have a great day.